Teferi. Now, we have a very interesting challenge, and this shows how sanctions work in ways that sometimes you don't see around the world. There's an Iranian speaker that is next. However, U.S. corporate power usually aligns with the U.S. in acting and breaking not only supplies, but even internet connections. So our next speaker, Fouad Azadi, who is a professor at the University of Tehran, isn't able to join us on Zoom today. That's something that is often blocked from the U.S. Fearing that this might happen, we are determined always to do workarounds as the sanctioned countries themselves. In order to be self-reliant, they got to constantly find workarounds to everything. So we did an interview with Fouad Azadi beforehand on Skype. Joe Lombardo arranged to do that interview. And we're going to play that now because we refuse to allow voices to be silenced. And we want to say that this is part of what happens also. I think we've been on programs where a Palestinian speaker will suddenly Zoom directly cut the program, where Facebook has cut programs, where Twitter accounts with thousands of followers are suddenly just snipped. This is the way that U.S. and its imperialist allies work to try to silence the people of the world. And we need to be determined to resist that silencing. So, Joe, I think this is an important lesson in sanctions. If you could please play the interview with Fouad Azadi. Thank you. And then we will go to a Q&A. We're running a little bit behind time, but really this is such a wealth of information and material. And we also do want to say there are a number of questions asking, can this be rebroadcast? Yes. Do people have access to it? Yes. Well, I'll stop here. Thank you. There's no sound coming through, Joe.
Can you hear it?
No, we can't hear it. We can see the picture. It says that sound is on, but we're not hearing.
Yes. Generally, you don't match what we get in Iran.
Can you hear now?
The next.
Yes, we can hear, but the video went down.
The most sanctioned countries is Korea, North Korea, and then go down to this other countries. And I think you have panelists from these countries that are facing serious sanctions. With regard to Iran sanctions, as you know, there was a hope that through the nuclear agreement, at least some of these sanctions would go away. And that was signed in 2015 during the Obama presidency. And when Mr. Trump came into office about a year after his presidency, as you remember, in 2018, he left the agreement. And the current Biden administration is more or less following the lead of the previous administration, the Trump administration. Although they criticize President Trump for his Iran policy, they seem to be addicted to sanctions the same way that Trump was, and the same way other US government officials have been in the last number of decades towards Iran. And the current situation is that if a country wants to follow UN Resolution 2231, which is the UN resolution that brought the nuclear agreement as part of a UN document, and based on the UN Resolution 2231, countries are supposed to be able to trade with Iran freely, and interference with Iran's international economic trade is prohibited based on Article 26 of the nuclear agreement, which is UN Resolution 31. And what the United States government is doing is not only not following the UN resolution, the US government is actually punishing the countries that are trying to follow that UN resolution. So what the Trump administration did was to withdraw from the agreement, and they also said they will punish countries that engage in economic activity, which is opposed to the UN resolution. So what the US is doing is actually breaking international law. In that sense, the United States is also breaking international law by violating other countries' sovereignty. Companies in Europe, Asia, Africa, or Latin America are supposed to be free from interference from foreign government. If you dictate the law that is passed by the US Congress on companies of other countries, you are basically violating that country's sovereignty. And that's exactly what the US is doing. The US could dictate American companies, I guess, but dictate other countries' companies, violation of the issue of sovereignty is one of the basic principles of the national United States violating that. And the other point that is important to mention is that these policies are not really working in terms of achieving their goal. They are hurting ordinary citizens in Iran. They're killing people in Iran, deprived of the medicine that we eat outside, the difficulties that they have because of sanctions, limitation. So ordinary citizens are getting hurt, but the objective US in terms of overthrowing the Iranian government has not been achieved. The objective of getting more concessions out of the Iranian government has not been achieved. And since the US left the agreement, as you may remember, 2018, Iran stayed in the agreement for about a year, 2019, and then gradually decided to reduce its commitments under the agreement. So Iran's nuclear program is actually more advanced now than comparison before. So if the idea was to limit Iran's nuclear program, that has obviously failed. So the objectives that were presented by the Trump administration have not materialized. So the sanctions are not effective in terms of achieving foreign policy goals. The sad news is that the Biden administration seems to fight the sanctions. They liked the nuclear agreement, having Iran limit its nuclear program. The part of the nuclear agreement that deals with Iran's nuclear program they like. But the part of the agreement that limits sanctions and removes sanctions, they don't seem to like. So generally, the situation that we have is not very good. Talks in Vienna are not achieving much so far. And the basic difficulty is that the United States wants to keep some of the sanctions that the Trump administration imposed, which is against the text of the agreement. One part of the agreement was for the U.S. to stop the sanctioning the practices that in the program. What the Trump administration did was to relabel some of the sanctions. For example, something without a sanction because it was related to me. They put another label on it and then they continue that sanction. Really doesn't make a difference what label you have for sanctions. What is important is whether you follow the agreement, the letter and spirit of the agreement. And that's what's lacking in this moment. And this is, I think, a point and example that trusting the United States government is not something that's very wise. We have representatives from other countries, foreign policy establishments of these countries. Is that trusting the words of American politicians is not a good idea. And the political chaos that we see in the United States is this big question that whether American diplomats that are in Vienna can actually deliver on the promises that they made the negotiating. As we speak, we have Republican senators and congressmen threaten to tear apart whatever agreement the Biden administration reaches with Iran. We have the November elections, congressional elections. There's a good possibility that the U.S. Congress is going to be controlled by the Republicans, and if that happens, even if there is an agreement, there's a chance that the Republicans will cause difficulty with that agreement. And then have the 2024 presidential election, the Biden presidency, at that time we don't know. And so there are a lot of questions on whether we can trust American diplomats with promises that they make. The sanctions conclude they are very complicated, a very complicated issue. They don't work in terms of achieving foreign policy goals, but they do work in terms of killing innocent people. So let me thank again our host and thank the organizers for organizing this important topic. And hope to be able to see you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for taking the time to do that interview, and thank you, Fuad Azadi, for helping us get the voice of Iran around to a much wider audience. And we need to do a lot more programs like this. We have 3 short announcements, and then I do want to ask each of our speakers to come back on with their camera and unmute. But we first want to hear from Ann Garrison, who is part of the Sanctions Kill campaign, is going to describe a little bit of what her plans are to do with today's program and has done with past programs. Joe Lombardo is going to describe a little bit of a very special report that Sanctions Kill issued and how it could have wider distribution. And Zach Kerner is going to describe a forthcoming book. But these are quite short, and I think we'll have time for some good concluding remarks and answers to questions. So, Anne, please join in.
Okay, thank you. All I have to say is, is that I hope we can all collaborate on sharing what this webinar exposes. I work on a weekly hour on the Pacifica Radio Network called COVID, Race, and Democracy that airs in New York, Washington, D.C., Houston, and Los Angeles. And we're going to start airing a 1-hour version of the webinar on February 7th. We already did a show about sanctions in which we relied heavily on the work of the Sanctions Kill Coalition. So please help us by sharing this with your lists and friends who couldn't attend. The video archive will become available on the Sanctions Kill website soon, and I think you'll get it by email. And we'll post our show, our hour-long version, to the Sanctions Kill website as well. So go out and represent.
Thank you. Okay, Joe Lombardo, I think you should come on to describe this special report.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, we've had a few technical troubles on the webinar today. I wanted to reemphasize what Ann said. Not only will you get a link to the video, that will be the YouTube video, but it's good to see it again so you can educate yourselves. But it's more important to spread it out, to put it out to your own email list, social media friends and contacts, and get this as far as we can, because sanctions are the way that they are conducting war primarily today. But the Sanctions Kill put out a really significant report where we went over various countries, what is happening in these countries with sanctions, and so that people can get a very important understanding. When the General Assembly meeting was in progress in this fall, we met with the delegation from Venezuela and presented this report. And they said they will help try to get it out to other members of the United Nations. All nations need to see this report. Additionally, we have sent it out to congresspeople from throughout the country and political leaders. And you can see this report by going to the Sanctions Kill website at sanctionskill.org, read it, inform yourselves, and then get that out, just like the video that we have seen. And this video talked only about a few countries that are sanctioned, but there are over 40. And we will have other videos so that other countries can get their voice heard right here in the belly of the beast, and let people know what our media is not telling you about sanctions. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. And next, let me ask Zach, to talk about the upcoming book.
Thanks, Sarah. So I just wanted to say a few quick words about the next project from the Sanctions Kill campaign, which we're all very excited about. And that's a book that we're publishing. It's more like an anthology of articles that have been written by activists and organizers domestically and internationally over the past few years. The book is going to focus on many of the important themes that we discussed today, which is the growing resistance to U.S. sanctions. The subtitle of the book, at least the working subtitle, is "The World Stands Up." And in addition, we will cover some of the other countries that we, unfortunately didn't have enough time to talk about today, including Afghanistan, China, Cuba, and many others. And finally, the book will include articles that analyze sanctions through a principled anti-imperialist lens, which is to say as economic warfare, and will also include some helpful reports and toolkits for educating others about sanctions. And so we hope that the book will serve as an important resource on the true nature of U.S. sanctions, how they have been applied to particular countries, and how those affected have been working together to resist them. So please be on the lookout for future announcements about the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And let me ask as we go to the Q&A if you can help on the publishing of this book, if you can help us continue. There is a very important donate button. I'm going to post it in the chat. I think Joe can post it here on the site, but it's sanctionskill.org/donate. Couldn't be simpler, but it is donations. It's through IFCO Pastors for Peace, tax exempt, People's Organization donations. So please, if you can make a donation, these donations really add up, and they just help us. How do you publish a book when publishers don't want an issue to be heard, and yet we are determined to make our voice heard? So that's it, sanctionskill.org/donate. Now on the Q&A, we have so many questions that there's no way to do it, and as folks know, it's already over time. So I'm going to try to summarize, and I hope I'm doing justice on this. But there were several, and let me ask all of the speakers, the panelists today, to both come back on the screen and also when you turn on your mics and we kind of all appear. Although try to keep background noise down. But a number of the questions asked about the destabilization along with the sanctions that the United States carries out, such as through NED programs, supposedly for democracy, USAID funded programs, that while making the economy scream, at the same time they are destabilizing and funding an opposition. That's one question that in different ways went to different speakers. And I think we'll be able to hear from each of the speakers at least once round, but we want to end by 3. But there was also questions on how the U.S. has managed to impose sanctions through the UN Security Council. And this is certainly true when we look at Korea for 70 years. When we look at Eritrea, this has been true for Iraq, for Libya, that the sanctions aren't only through all different agencies of the U.S. Commerce Department, State Department, through the European Union, and so on, but also there are UN sanctions. Even while the United Nations General Assembly is speaking against the sanctions, or, for example, has voted overwhelmingly against the blockade of Cuba. So it's a question there about the functioning of the UN, particularly Security Council, under U.S. pressure. And the other question I can answer, there were a number of questions asking, can we rebroadcast this? Can we share it? And I think we've already dealt with that. And the answer is yes, but contact us if you want to hear it yes again. And so the only way I think to do this is turn on your mics and wave your hand to figure out some sort of order of who would like to speak. Unfortunately, we cannot bring back Fuad Azadi because he was on by Skype, and that's great that we were able to at least do that. So I got to see a hand raised here so I know in what order we want to go, but I do hope that each of the panelists today will have concluding remarks that address either those questions, or it could be another question that you saw in the chat. Everybody could look at the chat, or another closing comment you want to make. But and I hope I summarize the things I saw the most strongly coming through. Okay, good. I see Francisco Campbell. We'll take you first from Nicaragua.
In the case of Nicaragua, the 2018 coup attempt is an expression of the combination of diplomatic economic measures, all directed at trying to overthrow the government, working closely with individuals who, in effect, were on the payroll of the United States government. Basically, actors who were, in fact, operating as a foreign agent, advocating for the foreign policy of the United States, which is directed at trying to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. So the question as to how all these various elements come together, I believe, is clearly manifested in what they tried to do in Nicaragua. And of course, the Nicaraguan people were able to rally around their government and defeated the coup attempt. But the struggle continues because the United States continue with its European allies, continue to apply pressure on Nicaragua, hoping to achieve their objective of destroying the Sandinista revolution. And that is why it is so important to have international solidarity counteracting this destabilizing campaign, and in the process trying to rid the world of this pernicious behavior by the United States and its European allies that seeks to, in effect, reinstate neo-colonial domination and countries that have really committed themselves to be free and to adopt a path that leads to development and prosperity for all of our citizens. So I believe that to get a clear understanding as to how this pernicious strategy unfolds, you could look at what happened in the case of Nicaragua with the 2018 coup attempt.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Francisco Campbell. All right, let me see another hand here. Please don't be shy. And just to say, we are planning future webinars, one of them on the shutdown and the use of social media. I believe Ann Garrison is working on that, also Jerry Condon from Veterans for Peace, and several others, but examining how Zoom, Facebook, Twitter, and many other social media platforms can work to shut down. Now, I raised some initial questions, but there may be other points that, based on this panel, you now have on your mind and would like to address. So let me see a next hand. You don't? I'm gonna just call on you. Okay, is that Elias? Is that a hand?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, we'll take you next.
I thought my hand was raised in the icon, but I could be wrong.
Oh, I see. It certainly was. Excuse me.
No, it's okay. I could always raise a real hand. So, yeah, I mean, I think this goes, it's a question from the Q&A section that's directly addressed to me, to Elias Amare, from Marta Schmishi, and it's a very relevant question. She says, isn't the Security Council required by UN Charter Article 33 to take actions short of sanctions, exhaust all peaceful measures before it imposes coercive measures like sanctions. It seems that diplomacy and negotiated alternatives are not fully used, and this is something peace activists should demand of their governments. I completely agree with this. The UN Charter should be the basis of international law, where extreme measures like quote-unquote sanctions, but economic warfare, are imposed on countries. Only when all avenues debate through the UN the UN Security Council are exhausted can the Chapter 7 be raised. But clearly in the case of Eritrea, as our experience showed in 2009, it was hastily rammed through. I mean, who can go against empire? Again, it's the Thucydides imperial dictum: the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must, unfortunately. So a group of countries in the member countries of the United Nations, including Nicaragua, including Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, China, Russia, and from Africa, my country, Eritrea, Angola, 22 all in all, have come up with an alliance or a group called Group of Friends in Defense of the UN Charter. They're saying #UN Charter is our rules. It's not just any vague rules-based order as the Biden administration is claiming. The UN Charter should be the basis of international law. And if you clearly stick to it, economic warfare is illegal. So I agree again with Martha Schmidt for raising this important question. And this is something peace activists and Sanctions Skill Coalition should look into. And maybe, as Malcolm X once was thinking, to bring the plight of black people in America to the United Nations as a human rights issue. So maybe there's something under international law that should be looked into to make illegal any unilateral, economic warfare or sanctions unless passing through rigorous examination by UN Security Council that strictly adhere to the UN Charter.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ilyas Amare. Right. Who is next here? Erica. Excellent.
So I just want to say, for North Korea, destabilization looks like constant military exercises. These military exercises are aggressive, and North Korea has no way of knowing whether they are guised for a real attack. The exercises have historically been very threatening and have had names like decapitation exercises, threatening the country's leadership. And the U.S. doesn't just use sanctions, but it also combines it with other strategies in order to overthrow the North Korean government and refuses to treat the country as a sovereign nation. With response to the UN question, UN sanctions have also played a huge role in the development of North Korea, and U.S. imposed sanctions are just an example of U.S. imperialism. The U.S. plays a role in UN sanctions as well. Collectively, both UN sanctions and unilateral U.S. sanctions have resulted in an almost total ban on DPRK-related trade, investment, and financial transactions. And so while U.S. sanctions date back to the start of the war around 1950, the UN Security Council has levied pretty severe multilateral sanctions since 2006 over concerns about North Korea's nuclear weapon program. And so the first generation of UN sanctions were called smart sanctions. They targeted state and party leaders by restricting the supply of weapons, missile technology, and material, and select luxury goods. In the second generation, it was created in response to the forced North Korean nuclear test in 2016. And these are called sectoral sanctions. They were applied indiscriminately towards entire sectors of North Korea's economy, irrespective of those sectors' ties to the nuclear program. And this has had a really devastating effect on the economy, as the top export economies in North Korea were targeted, including minerals, seafood, textiles, and agricultural products. So in terms of imports, though, the resolutions also significantly limit North Korea's import of energy, ban the import of heavy machinery, industrial equipment, and transportation vehicles. And they also forbid any joint ventures with North Korean entities, which blocks off a lot of foreign investment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Erica. All right. Carlos Ron. Yes, please.
Once again, I would like to thank everyone for allowing us to participate in this event and, of course, for joining us in this conversation. I think that I just wanted to just reflect a little on the issue of the forms of different forms of attacks. And, you know, we mentioned before that but in the case of Venezuela, at least, but I know this is the same in other countries, we have been under a hybrid war since the beginning of the Bolivarian Revolution. And that means that there's all these different types of attacks that accompany the use of the unilateral coercive measures or the sanctions. But it is always a joint effort. It's always attacking on several different fronts at the same time. What I think is important for us to reflect upon is that for some reason there's a narrative that tries to minimize sanctions as a tool and somehow sets the belief or tries to portray the belief that sanctions are somehow better than conventional war. The sanctions are different than all these other attacks, and this is what I think we should really stand against and make a lot of noise about this, because the impacts, the effects of these measures are even more devastating than sometimes that conventional confrontations. And in the same way as in conventional military confrontations, you can be affected and the whole population is affected. Well, in the same way as sanctions have that quality. You see, a lot of the narrative coming from the State Department is that, oh, we only target certain persons, we only target certain government officials, and we don't want to hurt the people of so and so country. That's not true, because in practical terms, and this is something that people must understand, any official that carries an important role in the country and that plays a role in the country's relations with other countries or with other institutions, once they come into that list of names of people that are sanctioned, well, then you won't have there's a lot of people that for fear won't interact. So in a way, you're jeopardizing the whole relation that the country has. You're not just jeopardizing a person. It's not Carlos Ron, specifically myself. It's that I, as representative of the Venezuelan government, then my position or my tasks cannot be completed or fulfilled because I'm on a set list. And this has a terrible effect on the way countries can deal with their problems. One of the questions, for example, in the Q&A that was addressed to us was, the issue that comes up that the sanctions only made just showed that there was a previous situation, economic situation, that was the cause of Venezuela's economic problems and not the sanctions. Well, the thing is, first of all, I don't agree. I think the sanctions have had a very tough impact in Venezuelan economy, and we can see there's a lot of studies that have been done on the income that Venezuela has not received. We haven't received about 99%. And I'm not exaggerating with that number. 99% of the income we would receive, 4 or 5 years ago before the sanctions came into play. I mean, we would average about $54 billion a year income. And this past year, we only were able to access to $600 million during the whole year, and that's because all the oil and all the products that Venezuela is not allowed to place into the international market. But to think that, stepping back a little, to think that sanctions have nothing to do with previous economic problems, but even if Venezuela was trying to solve problems that were stemming from, say, other causes, not sanctions, but let's say the drop of price of oil, which is something that usually, of course, affects oil producers. Well, if Venezuela needs to renegotiate that, if Venezuela needs to go to the banks and ask for a loan, if Venezuela wants to issue a bond or sell some of its assets, it can no longer do that because of the sanctions. So you're asking Venezuela, even if the conditions were initially different from the conditions imposed by the sanctions, economic difficulties, you're asking Venezuela to solve its problems without any of the tools that are available to countries that are not under a sanctions regime. So that is a false trick, or that they try to tell people, oh, the problems have to do with previous problems. Well, the solutions are now not in our hands because precisely of the effects of what the sanctions do. In any case, sanctions have deeply hurt the Venezuela's capability not only to receive income from trade, but it has also hurt Venezuela's capability to renew it, or to do maintenance, basically, on its industrial production capabilities, on its oil sector. So these are terrible, terrible measures that have an impact and that do not pick and choose who they hurt. They hurt entire populations, and that is the whole point. And this is a crime against humanity. This is something that we have taken up to the International Criminal Court. We can continue to use all possible venues, but this is a crime against humanity because you're basically condemning a whole population. You're punishing a whole population in order to achieve the change of government that you desire. This is the policy of the United States now towards Venezuela and towards many of our countries. So I just thought that's something that we must reflect on and think about when we evaluate the impact of these things.
Thank you so much, Carlos Ron. And yes, this is a crime against humanity. I'm also reminded we should bring in, and I should have raised earlier, the case of Alex Saab, as a Venezuelan diplomat, literally kidnapped from a plane when it was refueled on Cabo Verde. I had an opportunity to travel to Cabo Verde. In his defense, he's now in jail, in federal jail in Miami, Florida, put on trial. Why? For helping to bring food and supplies from Iran to Venezuela. So this is a threat to every diplomat, even those who are with us here today, and to every individual standing up to U.S. sanctions. The threat of literally being snatched from a flight. It's an impediment even to every form of travel and communication. So we really need to strengthen the global link and to bring the people's movement in behind every one of these countries resisting. Deacon Joseph, if you want to have Davari from Ethiopia, if you're able to turn back on your camera if you have concluding remarks, and to also remind people, if you can help us produce this very simple book, because we want to have it very inexpensively, please do connect on sanctionskill.org/donate. If you want to reproduce any of this material, you're certainly available to, or you can connect with us. If you repackage it in interesting ways, send it to us, and we'll also post it on Sanctions Kill. This is how we continue to connect. And I'm shocked that there's still hundreds of viewers on, even we're 2 hours in and we got to conclude. So Deacon Joseph, are you still here? I know that Deacon Joseph said he might need to be off on another call, so it could be he's not still here. And I think we will conclude with this to thank our speakers again, because this is a huge range from Korea, maybe the longest, oldest sanctions, to Ethiopia, the newest sanctions, to Venezuela, maybe the most numerically, and Iran. I think maybe that even Iran beats Venezuela on the number of sanctions. Eritrea so long on the sanctions, and Nicaragua new vicious sanctions against such a small country. So let's stand increasingly together. And we will continue to address other sanctioned countries, campaigns, and how we continue this work. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Solidarity.
Yes.
La lucha continua.
La lucha continua. That's so true.
Thank you very much. La lucha continua, and justice will prevail.
And justice will prevail. Yes.
As we say in Eritrea, victory to the masses.
That is true. And increasing resistance is a powerful weapon. Bye-bye.
Yes.